Hello, you're watching the Tropics topics of September 3rd, 2018. We are currently monitoring three systems right now, but we'll be spending the most time this episode regarding Tropical Storm Gordon, which was previously Invest 91L and potential Tropical Cyclone 7. This has since become a tropical storm over South Florida, currently with winds at 50 miles an hour and a pressure at or below 1007 millibars. We also have, we'll touch on these two at the end of the video, Tropical Storm Florence, which is now a high-end tropical storm, 65-mile-an-hour winds and 997 millibar pressure, and this wave out here in the far East Atlantic with a medium percent chance of development in the next 5 days. Here's the wide shot. As you can see here, Gordon over here over South Florida, Florence here still way out there in the Atlantic, and then this wave that just emerged off the coast of Africa and should be heading west over the tropical Atlantic. Let's talk about Gordon, which will be the main focus of this video. You can see here Gordon, currently a moderate tropical storm, located about just to the west of Marco Island in Florida, moved across the southern part of the peninsula today, and now is exiting the other side. But you can see here that there's a bunch of scattered convection scattered all across the peninsula, as we can see here in this radar shot from Key West. This is using weather.us, a great source for radar. You can see here all these bands extending pretty much all across southern Florida from Miami to Homestead to the Everglades. And you can see here, here's the core of the storm. It looked pretty good. Starting to kind of fall apart a little bit in these last few frames, but don't be fooled by that because these small cores can really fluctuate in intensity and presentation. As we can see here, look pretty good. Now it's kind of starting to fall apart a little bit, but again, don't let that fool you because the sting is going to intensify and will probably be a pretty significant system by the time it reaches the Central Gulf Coast, but we'll get there when we get there. You can see all these bands coming up into the system, feeding into it, but a lot of it is still based on the east side. That's because there's still kind of quite a bit of dry air on the side. You can kind of see that here. This little cell right here starts to get going, and then just starts to fall apart. That tells me there's still a bunch of dry air in general in this area right here. So still some struggles for the storm. You can see here some of it. The southern half isn't very well defined, while the eastern half is basically blanketed in convection. Recon has been going through the system in and out, but hasn't been able to pass over the peninsula because that goes against the regulations. And you can see here they recorded suspect wind speeds up to 50 knots. That's probably equal to 45 knot winds at the surface. And then again, pressure reading, as I said earlier, probably below 1007. They went in there and found flight level winds of about 1004 millibars, so that probably equates to 1004 or 1005 millibars at the surface because they didn't hit the exact center. So 1005, 1004 millibars. That's probably where it's at right now. So yeah, this Gordon, its current intensity right now. What about the future? Well, it's very likely to intensify because if we can see here, here's the water vapor loop from the Marshall Space Flight Center. You can see here these two troughs that I was discussing yesterday. The one has moved into Georgia, the northern one, and then the southern one has moved south and is now over western Cuba. And there's a pretty big gap in between, so that Gordon can basically split the gap between the two and be able to find a way to nestle in between some higher values of wind shear. And this low down here will continue to move off towards the southwest and not be a huge player. If anything, it'll just be more of a steering flow than anything. And in between, usually in between two troughs, you naturally have upper level ridging. So an upper anticyclone is likely to form over this area, and with Gordon likely to be underneath of the upper anticyclone, that is favorable for a storm to get upper divergence, which promotes basically spreading apart of flow in the upper levels, which is good for developing, pulsating convection that can help the storm intensify at a more earnest rate. That's as it continues off towards the north and northwest, the west and northwest, excuse me, towards the central Gulf Coast, likely somewhere between, Port Fourchon in Louisiana, all the way over to basically the Alabama-Florida border near Pensacola and Perdido Key at this time. And the most likely landfall area is somewhere between New Orleans and probably Mobile. That's the most likely landfall area of Gordon at this point. We can see that here in the ECMWF model, which has Gordon here probably a bit too weak. I'll discuss why it might be a bit too weak in a little bit. Like I said earlier, the upper anticyclone, and there's some other factors I'll get into. You can see here, this is a pretty modest tropical system, moves in. That's probably about this point right here. So that's about, I'd say, not Biloxi, but close to Biloxi, and along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, maybe near Gulfport. So that's the most likely landfall spot at this time, but it could be a lot more intense. You can see here, the H1 model has a 60-knot tropical storm that will eventually move into this portion of coastline near, I believe that's Biloxi, moving into that general area as a 60-knot tropical storm. This is probably going to be a hurricane by this time. National Hurricane Center says a 60-knot peak, which is 70 miles per hour, although considering that Gordon has been basically surpassing intensity guidance so far, it could easily be a hurricane by the time it gets here, especially considering how small the core is. If you go back to this and see this little, basically, this burst convection you could see right there, that's basically the core of the storm. It's very compact, it's very small. You can see that here in the radar too. Not very big, and because of that, it's more suspect to more fluctuations in intensity. So that means it could be a lot stronger than forecast, or it could be a lot weaker than forecast, assuming that wind shear could decrease, but at this time it's looking unlikely. Again, sea surface temperatures ahead of this thing, plenty warm enough for tropical development. Now, there's a little bit of a rainstorm going on outside right now, so I apologize if you can kind of hear that through the audio. Anyway, so Gordon, again, is very likely to intensify, probably to hurricane status. We can see here in the steering flow, right here, you can see right here, here's Gordon, right here, this area over Southwest Florida, and this is the general track. So something kind of like this into Mississippi is the most likely track. You can see out here, there's a lot of puffy cumulus in the area, which means that there is quite a bit of warm ocean underneath, and warm ocean underneath means that there is a lot of heat available for the storm to take advantage of. You can see here all this, you can see a little bit of shear right here. In fact, you can probably see this a little bit in the water vapor shot. You can see a little bit of northerly shear over here at the central Gulf. This is associated with this upper disturbance here over eastern Texas, which is currently giving me the rainfall right now, even though I'm a bit further west. This is coming from all this, so this is going to continue to move into Texas and will not be a big hindrance on Gordon as it approaches from the southwest, or southeast, excuse me. And you can also see here, now why is it moving towards this direction? Well, you can see this ridge right here pretty clearly, and if you can see in the cumulus field, there's a pretty big gap in here where there isn't any, there's basically clear skies, so that means that there is a pretty predominant ridge over this region. So as Gordon continues to move in this direction, it'll feel the influence of the ridge and will move into this portion of coastline right here. So that's the basic steering flow, and then it will kind of wrap around it and then kind of curve up into Arkansas and Missouri. The solution of it moving into Texas is no longer on the table, really. This is basically the main steering flow in addition to the trough that will dip in over the Great Plains and basically pull this thing, Gordon, up into the Midwest. So rainfall is the biggest deal with this storm. If it becomes a hurricane, then yes, that will increase the wind threat and the storm surge. But I'll get more on that in a minute. But you can see here rainfall totals. This shows about 4 inches of rain in general around the New Orleans area, extending all the way to the Alabama border. Isolated areas could see more if you're stuck in a training band. So you need to be cautious of the potential for some flash flooding in the area. And as it moves inland, it's likely to slow down a little bit, so there could even be a bit more rainfall up in northern Louisiana, maybe near Shreveport and Monroe. That area could see quite a bit of rainfall from Gordon as well. It's not just the coastal areas, it's inland as well. But strictly focusing on the coastal areas right now, because in addition, we also have storm surge watches and warnings. Areas in this lighter shade of pinkish purple, that's basically a storm surge watch. This area in much more brighter, like hot pink, that's a storm surge warning. So storm surge watches, storm surge warnings, and that's in effect basically from New Orleans all the way over to the Alabama border in Mississippi. So the entire Mississippi Gulf Coast underneath a storm surge warning, excuse me, and inundations up to potentially as high as 3 to 5 feet is possible along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi and even a bit further west into extreme eastern Louisiana as well. This area of coastline is especially susceptible to storm surge. So especially if you're in Biloxi, Gulfport, even in the easternmost metro area of New Orleans, you need to be very vigilant of the potential for storm surge. And even along the southern coast of Lake Pontchartrain, you could see some storm surge, especially if Gordon is located over here. You're going to have a lot of a lot of flow coming in from the north, which could push a lot of water along the coast up near the lakefront in New Orleans. So here's the National Hurricane Center forecast track. Again, tropical storm warnings in effect for southern Florida. These will likely be discontinued by tonight. And then tropical storm watches, basically from Destin all the way over to the central Gulf Coast of Louisiana, and hurricane watches in effect basically from New Orleans all the way over to Pensacola. And these may be upgraded to warning soon if Gordon continues this intensification trend beyond the actual forecast. You will note that it has shifted fair bit, not fair bit, but quite a bit to the east of what it was yesterday. Yesterday it was basically over New Orleans. Now it's over Biloxi, but still going to be a big problem nonetheless. Could even be stronger than this. This could easily be a hurricane moving into this area by tomorrow night, and then afterwards again moving up into this region of the country. Probably slowing down a little bit, and probably just being a big rainmaker for this area of the country. So that's Gordon. We'll talk more about Gordon in a later date if I make another update tomorrow. But and I'm going to touch on Tropical Storm Florence here, which did get a little bit more strength this morning, but now it's starting to kind of lose it a little bit. You can kind of see the low-level center becoming a bit more exposed now, considering that there's still a lot of dry air that's being entrained in the storm, which is kind of basically offsetting the convection to the east. The central area of spin, the center basically, is outrunning the convection, so that's obviously not favorable and will probably end up in weakening at some point or another for Florence. And there's two possible solutions. Again, Florence is very far out in time. It's a very long-range threat, if one at all. So we're just keep a wary eye on this if you are in some of the potential areas like Bermuda per se, maybe the Leeward Islands, East Coast United States. Just distantly monitor it for now. But if it stays weaker, then it will probably end up passing a bit further to the south. Maybe not exactly like this, but it will end up passing farther to the south because it will have more reliance on the lower level trade flow because it doesn't extend nearly as high up in the troposphere and doesn't feel the effect of ridging or troughing in the upper levels. But if it does stay stronger, then its extent will be higher up into the troposphere, and that will likely mean that it could recurve a bit earlier. This is the better solution for everybody, but unfortunately the track right now looks like it will probably staying just to the south. The National Hurricane Center track kind of splits the path between the two. Shows it becoming a 70-mile-an-hour tropical storm later today. I have my doubts over this, though. But for now, it's 65-mile-an-hour tropical storm in the middle of nowhere, basically. And then kind of splits the run between these two solutions, the Euro solution being further south and the GFS solution being further north. And basically just cutting it in between. And then intensifying it towards the end of the run. 5 days out, you can still see it's way far away from the United States. Though Bermuda, it's getting a bit too close for comfort. So you might want to just keep a wary eye on it if you live in Bermuda. But again, any impacts wouldn't come until for another week, basically, for that region of for the basin. And in addition to that, we do have this other wave out here to the south of Cabo Verde Islands, although this wave will not really be a huge threat to land and isn't even currently forecast to develop in the next 2 days, but it could have a shot later this week. We'll just have to wait and see on that. But for now, we're just going to keep a very close eye on tropical storm, potentially becoming Hurricane Gordon very soon as it approaches the central Gulf Coast of the United States. And again, just keeping a wary eye on Florence, potentially a longer range threat for some areas of the basin. And we'll continue to keep tabs on this wave. All right, that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to stay weather alert during this time.